Catch the NBA playoffs on Sling TV, the most flexible live TV streaming service, putting consumers in control to watch games their way with flexible subscriptions. Want to catch one game or a full series on ESPN? Grab a 1, 3, or 7-day pass. If you want to catch as many games as possible, get a monthly subscription with our ABC, NBC, and ESPN combo package. Either way, Sling lets you watch the playoffs your way with no long-term contracts. Learn more at sling.com.
Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to look back 2 years, the 2024 draft, and see how things stand with the Orioles 2024 draft class now. And that'll be coming up later on this episode, which is brought to you by IQ Bar, our exclusive snack, hydration, and coffee sponsor. IQ Bar protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ Joe mushroom coffees are a delicious, low-sugar, brain and body fuel you need to win your day. IQ Bar's plant protein bars are the smarter snack choice with plenty of protein, tons of fiber, and no added sugar. IQ Mix is a zero-sugar drink mix that hydrates with electrolytes, improves mood, and boosts clarity. IQ Joe is a mushroom coffee designed for mental clarity and packed with 200 milligrams of natural caffeine. Plus, it comes in 4 different flavors that will totally transform your morning routine. With over 25,000 5-star reviews and counting, more people than ever are fueling their busy lifestyles with IQ Bars, brain and body boosting bars, hydration mixes, and mushroom coffees. Their ultimate sampler pack includes all 3. IQ Bars become part of my daily routines, whether it's starting my morning with IQ Joe, grabbing an IQ Bar or IQ Mix to refuel or rehydrate after a hard workout. And right now, IQ Bar is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, including the Ultimate Sampler Pack, plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, text MLB to 64,000. Text MLB to 64,000. That's MLB to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. And on a recent episode, Nick brought up this idea, which was that maybe at some point soon we revisit the 2024 and 2025 draft classes. And I think we will revisit the 25 draft class sometime this year, but it seems like a good time to go back and look at the 2024 draft class, which has been the topic of a lot of discussion in the last year. And what a lot of that discussion has focused on is the Orioles not getting great results from players at the top of the class, particularly their first-round pick, Vance Honeycutt, but then seeing some success as you get further down the board. We've also had a lot of shakeup, though, in the last year. Austin O'Verne, their third-round pick, was shipped to Tampa Bay as part of the same Boz trade. Isaiah Salinas, a guy that was chosen in the 17th round that we were counting on seeing this season, unfortunately went on the IL recently. But then you've also had some positive developments. Christian Rodriguez, after missing all of 2025, has bounced back nicely in 2026. He was the Orioles' 10th round pick in 24. And they continue to get some solid production from players, along with a resurgent DJ Layton, the Orioles' 6th round pick that year. But I know that any real discussion about the 24 draft class is naturally going to start with Vance Honeycutt. And Nick, after you brought this up, I went back and I looked at the live draft special that we did that night. And I don't know if you remember this, but I threw out the question a few picks before the Orioles were going to choose Honeycutt. And the teams that were on the board ahead of them at that point, this was right after the Marlins had made their pick. So the teams picking between the Marlins and the Orioles were the Brewers, the Rays, the Mets, the Blue Jays, and the Twins. And I threw out the question, which of those teams is going to spoil the Orioles draft board? And Nick, your response was possibly all of them. And I think that response has held up because if you look at the 3 picks leading up to Honeycutt in particular, the Mets got Carson Benz, who I think was collectively at the top of our draft board that year. The Blue Jays followed up with Trey Yesavitz. We know how that has worked out for them. And then Caitlin Culpepper goes at 21 to the Twins. Culpepper currently in AAA St. Paul in the Twins system, coming off a pretty nice 2025 season. Then it comes down to the 22nd pick. The Orioles select Vance Honeycutt. let's start back there. And I know that at the time we discussed the red flags with Honeycutt's game. We've seen them in the course of his career, but going back to that, in hindsight, how do you feel about that pick?
I have a long thought about it. Honestly, it's just it's nearly impossible to like look back and ignore what you know now, right, about these guys. And there are so many other factors at play with baseball development, right? What works for some guys in this organization wouldn't in another. There's no uniform way to develop hitters or pitchers. Everyone has their own philosophies and strategies. And just because you see a guy having success in one organization doesn't mean like he would have developed the same in another, and so on and so forth. We also don't know like the financial situation behind the scenes with the draft. Like you can make assumptions. Certain guys have more leverage. Sure, maybe some things will leak out here and there, but like the signing bonus pool, the financial side of the draft is a unique monster that we just don't have any insight to. Agents and players aren't, for the most part, going around putting $1.2 million price tag on a guy and flaunting it. We don't know like down the board what are the Orioles. We'll use the Orioles specifically. This is Orioles podcast. We don't know exactly going into a draft what does their downboard look like. Like who are the Nate Georges they're targeting in some random ass Missouri town that we have no idea, from some random high school out there that they know they're going to need an extra 300 or 400K, right, in the signing bonus pool to potentially get that kid in the later rounds. But even like ignoring all that and all the unknowns and just going back and looking at this draft class, it's obviously going to be the scars of Ants Honeycutt. We're assuming he's dead at this point and he's not going to become anything. But assuming he doesn't, right? And even if he just becomes Judd Fabian 2.0, people are going to look back at this draft class and not be happy. I don't think many people, ourselves included, we're not happy from the start. But I went back and I've looked at this board again, and yeah, all three of those teams, this board fell the worst possible way it possibly could. With Benj going to the Mets, then Savage, and then Kalen Culpepper. It was just 3 straight bullets to the chest that year in this draft class. And then who goes after Honeycutt? You look at the draft, it's a lot of high school arms. That's the riskiest first round pick you can make, right? A couple of catchers. There was a college arm. The Yankees went Ben Hess out of Alabama at 26. I think he's in AAA right now, pitching kind of well, but you're not going to pull him up. The only other player I could see a valid argument for is Ryan Waldschmidt from Kentucky. And again, it's easy to say, look what he's doing in Arizona right now. That would be great to have versus Vance Honeycutt. Maybe. And I think Ryan Waldschmidt's going to kick ass in Arizona, and I hope he does. Partly because he's on my Dynasty Fantasy team, so I want to see him succeed as I try to find a way to get him on the active roster now. But you look at Vance Honeycutt, again, this board, just terrible. This 2024 class, the hits are going to be massive. So you can't just brush it off as this class sucked. The hits are going to be massive. When you look at Connor Griffin, the Seaver King, maybe something big. Jack Caglione already in the majors. JJ Weatherholt, Nick Kurtz, Travis Bazzana, Chase Burns. The hits are going to be huge, but the depth just wasn't there with this draft class. And the way I look at it is like Ryan Waldschmidt, go back to Vance Honeycutt. Yes, there was that huge flaw, and he had huge wart in his game, historic wart, but you're looking at a premier center fielder who had a record-breaking collegiate year, not just UNC records, but ACC records, 3 years of dominance in a P4 conference. Waldschmidt started at Charleston Southern as an infielder, didn't have the arm for third base, transfers to Kentucky, moves to the outfield, tears his ACL in the Cape Cod League during the summer going into his final year at Kentucky. And a lot of like the public reports on Waldschmidt, they said maybe a center fielder, but maybe like an average corner outfielder in the big leagues. Teams didn't get to see him in the Cape Cod League. He DH'd for like the first quarter of his final year at Kentucky. So you really didn't have a ton of time to evaluate him defensively, at least at full strength. Vance Honeycutt was there from an 18-year-old true freshman kid doing it every single day in center field at UNC. If I'm in that room and I'm making that decision and I just watch this board fall apart, I'm taking the more established player, even with that massive wart, and just shooting the moon 99 out of 100 times. The Griffo Farrell pick was awful from the start. Cal DeBarge of Louisiana Lafayette was sitting right there. I would have even taken Caleb Lamavita, the catcher from California, over Griff O'Farrell. They nailed the Ethan Anderson one, the next pick, but the Vance Honeycutt one, maybe I'm yelling into the void, and people have tuned me up by now. But I'm passionate about the draft, and I think about this more than any human being should. You're picking late in the first round for once. I'd love to be back there again, honestly. But you're picking late in the first round. The depth in this class was lacking. The board fell in literally the worst possible way. And it was a new group running draft operations that year. So, and I think it was just I don't know. Maybe there's a scout. Some people like to listen to the show sometimes. Maybe there's a scout listening to this, screaming into their phone, thinking, "No, I yelled, I banged the table on draft night for the Orioles to go this way, and they went the other way. They went against consensus, and this could have turned out better." From my point of view, I just surface level scouting this stuff. I don't know which other direction they could have gone with that first pick. I think the more established profile of Honeycutt made a lot more sense. And again, I make that more often than not, even knowing what I know about Waldschmidt and Honeycutt and the different directions they go. I think at the top of the class, you just got to count that year as it was a wash. It did not go the Orioles' way. You missed. You're not going to hit all the time. And luckily, though, I think the rest of the class is, maybe we'll get into here to close out the episode. The rest of the class, I think, is showing much more life and bringing the depth of this system, creating stronger depth in the organization going into 2026. But yeah, that was my long thoughts rant about the number one pick there.
Yeah, they took a big swing with that pick, and we were all for it at the time. And yeah, I think that's what you do in that situation. Unfortunately, there's a 50% chance we were going to strike out on that pick, just like Vance Honeycutt is a 50% chance of striking out every at bat. And it seems like that's what's going to happen. Yeah, we all hated the Griff O'Farrell pick immediately. We loved the Ethan Anderson pick. It was ACC heavy first day. But yeah, luckily, and I can't say it any better than you just did right there, and it's your baby. I just follow your lead. I agree with you. I think there's a live podcast of us reacting to this. If you really want to see our real reactions in real time, it's out there. But luckily, like you said, later in the draft, I don't know about made up for, but at least it's almost like it parallels the system as a whole. Like, you don't have the first round 1A pick. There's top picks, but you did fill in depth throughout the rest of it. And maybe that's just fitting. And that's also 2024. Halfway through 2024 is when things started going sour for this organization. And of course, bad luck when it came to the draw. That's what I was going to say. Even if you wanted Waldschmidt, he went right before our pick again. Like, right before we took Griff O'Farrell, one pick before Waldschmidt. I can't even say his name. He's on one of my dynasty leagues too. You could have had Honeycutt and Ryan W. and just had a little bit of column B, but it didn't work out. And luckily, we make up for it later in the draft.
Yeah, it was interesting to revisit that episode because we were kind of coming around on the idea of the Orioles taking a flyer on Brody Brecht out of Iowa. And I remember we had a lot of discussion that night about, could they play some money with the slot game and go with Brecht first? Or could they take Honeycutt and then possibly if Brecht falls, get him with the pick that they ended up using Griff O'Farrell on? And just as a reminder of how much of a crapshoot the draft can be sometimes, there were command concerns about Brody Brecht during his time at Iowa, and so far in his professional career, we're getting a full sense of that. Great strikeout numbers, but the walks have definitely been an issue for him, and he's currently in high A with the Rockies system. To Nick's point, though, we said at the time the Rockies were the wrong organization for Brody Brecht, and we were right about that, I think. So there is a nuance to that has to really be thought about when you're talking about individual players. And it's not to say the Orioles were the wrong organization for Vance Honeycutt, but they had to go on their strengths and weaknesses. And we know that they really had a strong focus. They did up to that point, and they still do, on college outfielders. And the opportunity to get one that could stick up the middle was really tempting to them, especially when, at that point, it looked like at least the power and speed were going to play in pro ball. But you knew the hit tool you were carrying a massive risk with. In my ideal scenario, this was my ideal at the time, and it's still my ideal. The Mets don't take Carson Benz, the Blue Jays pass on him too, and he falls to the Orioles. But that didn't happen. The board didn't fall that way. And Nick, I think you bring up a really good point, because this was something that was really known about this draft class at the time. It was not as strong as the 2023 class. That was the industry consensus at that point. I remember we had Tyler Jennings on and talked about that at length. And the way it's played out since then, some teams have really hit on guys in this class. And I think there's a potential for a lot of talent to come out of it. But I think when you look back on it in 5 years, you're going to realize there's a really top-heavy first round that didn't produce as much depth, top to bottom, as some other first rounds have before or since.
Yeah, it seems like it might match or surpass some recent drafts when it comes to WAR total, but I don't think it's going to be up there as far as like number of first round picks that made the majors necessarily.
Yeah, and a lot of these guys in the back end of the first round are struggling. Slade Caldwell, high school pick to the Diamondbacks. I think he's struggling. Last time I looked, I think he's still in high A, hitting like a buck something. The big thing for me too is this was a wash again. It was worst case scenario after worst case scenario, and it all just hit at one time, unfortunately. And I do think that's not just completely bypassing. Like I said, there was a new group in charge of the draft that year, and I do think that a lot of it falls on them as well, and their ability to properly evaluate and execute this draft and navigate when shit hits the fan, pivot, and I don't know. But I will say, in response to that, not even just how the rest of the class or some of the class down ballot is maybe showing more life, but you looked at 2025 when everything fell perfectly. Not only did that board fall perfectly for the Orioles, but you go down that whole draft board. I think clearly when you look at the 2025 draft class, you see a stark difference in player profiles, and you can see, like, I think we talked about a lot of this that night and in episodes afterwards, how clearly changes were made in how they went about the draft process in 2025, which maybe they learned a little bit in 2024. And if that's a result of this 2024 class, I'll take that as well as another positive side effect.
Let's go over now to a player that was chosen towards the top of the draft that has been a success for the Orioles. That's Ethan Anderson, 61st overall, second-round pick. Anderson's 2025 season, as a reminder, the development is not always linear. He had some ups and downs at Aberdeen, then got promoted to Chesapeake at the end of the year, 20-game cup of coffee there. Spun that off into a very good run out in the Arizona Fall League, and so far at Chesapeake has been one of the Bay Sox steadier producers at the plate. And the most important thing is that after not getting a lot of reps in college at Virginia, he's seeing a lot of time behind the plate, 77 games caught coming into this week since he turned pro. So continuing to develop defensively, the little bit of batted ball data that we've gotten on him has been very positive. Now, something we've talked about a lot recently has been that there is actually a logjam with catchers at the top of the system, but Ethan Anderson is doing a very good job of controlling the things that he can control.
Yeah, like we've talked about, he's just a really, if you watch his plate appearances, he's almost like Taylor Ward-esque, where he seems to know his zone. He knows what he's comfortable swinging at. Time of recording, this isn't going to go hit the RSS feed until probably midweek, but he had 2 home runs on Tuesday night, and he's batting 274 with like an 867 OPS while playing catcher. And yeah, a lot of debate whether the defense is good enough to stay a catcher long term. I think it potentially good enough to at least be a backup catcher, bat first backup catcher, or if the bat's good enough to play first base on a regular basis, I think it could be. Time will tell, but he's kind of a little bit in between, stuck in between there. But I'm a big fan of the bat, and I think it's a good chance of working here. And
even if there's not space for him here, like honestly, if you look at Creed Willems and Ethan Anderson and who you want in AAA as like your emergency catcher, I think looking at total profile, I think I give Ethan Anderson the edge. as fun as Creed Williams' bat has been in AAA and as how much power is in there, like I think Ethan Anderson is just nothing about the game may be super sexy, but it's just that's why I brought up that point a couple weeks ago on the fly. Like, should he just be promoted to AAA at this point? Just find a home for him somewhere up there because maybe the ceiling isn't super high, but that's again with the rest of this draft class. The depth I think is becoming a lot stronger with this group, and Ethan Anderson does add to that. And the power has been just unreal. And I know, yeah, he's in AA, and that ballpark is a little bit more hitter friendly, but I'm not seeing a ton of like wall scrapers there. Like he's showing some real good power down there this year that I was not expecting, and that's going to help. So again, like he may not rank super highly on a lot of prospect lists, and I understand why, but like that's just a super safe, solid pick that he's evolved into. And yeah, I'm interested. And he could honestly, in the right organization, he could be potentially a pretty attractive trade chip as well if someone else pretty values his defense, because he's not a complete disaster but behind the plate by any means.
Before we get to the 10th or basically 10th round beyond in this draft, just some players to run down here as I touched on the Orioles. Third round pick that year was Austin O'Verne. He was traded to the Rays this past offseason for Shane Baz. The Orioles took a chance on Chase Alsop in the fourth round, and Alsop's got good stuff, but he's hurt right now, and the results in 2025 were kind of all over the map as he struggled at Delmarva. Ryan Stafford was their fifth round pick out of Cal Poly. They followed up with DJ Layton, who I think has been one of the bright spots in this class so far. After not putting up the best numbers in his FCL debut, he has been really good at Delmarva this year. And then they followed that up over the next few rounds with Carson Dorsey, a left-hander out of Florida, Colin Tuft, catcher out of Tulane, Jack Crowder, a right-hander out of Illinois, and then Christian Rodriguez, who I mentioned a moment ago, 10th round pick out of Cal State Fullerton. So there's some interesting profiles in that mix. Yeah, I don't know what's going to end up becoming of Alsop, but I think that with Layton, there's something there, and I've always liked Dorsey's stuff, even at the command. Hasn't translated yet, and Rodriguez, to his credit, has bounced back nicely after missing all of last year. So, any general thoughts on this section of the draft board?
Big fan of Christian Rodriguez. I do like what he's shown coming back from injury this year. Colin Tuft, surprisingly, putting up some pretty decent offense. He's got 6 home runs, again, at the time of recording, hit one on Tuesday night. Maybe the offense, and he's more athletic than your typical catcher. He can play more than just catcher, so maybe he has a chance to be like super utility type, at least in AAA. So that's interesting pick there. Ryan Stafford, I was a fan of the bat-to-ball skills, but there's just Griff O'Farrell syndrome. He can't put any oomph into anything, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to work out as far as the major leagues go. But DJ Layton, he's been really exciting. We've talked about it, where just a enigmatic FCL season last year with injuries and underperformance, or not underperformance, but just not the greatest stat line. But he comes out, smokes the ball, plays every position up the middle you can. Early this season in Delmarva, yeah, he strikes out a lot, but when he hits the ball, it's exciting. He's fast. He's athletic. He's definitely one that you feel like you could refine over time and become a pretty solid player up the middle.
Yeah, I noted. I said there's just like hints of Nate George in DJ Layton's game. Like it's a lot of controlled chaos right now, and a lot of what you're seeing is he just needs experience. He just needs at bats and more time on the field. And I'm not saying he's going to become the level of prospect that Nate George is. Which, by the way, Nate George, I don't know what's going on, man. But this mystery illness, I'm not going to speculate at all. But get better. This is a 19-year-old kid, and it doesn't sound like he's going to be back for what did Michael Elias say? A while. Yeah, scary there to see Nate George go down like that, but hopefully he's on the mend and get back on the field later this year. But yeah, with DJ Layton, I'm excited to see him just continue to show improvements throughout the year, and then next year, like, could next year be a big DJ Layton breakout, and could he emerge? He was a top 30 prospect, I think, at least by MLB pipeline standards, which you know, they are what they are. But he was a top 30 prospect after the draft, so guy with real intrigue there. And Yeah, Dorsey's just about command. The stuff is nasty. The stuff is so good. If he can command, which I think he's done a better job his last couple of outings. I have to look, but if he can figure out his command, that's another pitcher that I think truly can pop and be a viable option in this organization.
And even if the command never fully gets there, pretty good option to, I think, work out in relief, where the command isn't as important when you can just give it every pitch, everything you got.
If you go into the next part of the draft, really the 11 through 20 rounds, Nate George has been the highlight of that group. And as Nick said, we're certainly hoping for the best with his health, but he has really burst onto the prospect scene in the last year. And then two other guys that really have jumped out of this group, Sebastian Gongora, 11th round pick that year, out of Louisville. There were good reports about Gongora's fastball velocity coming out of Louisville, but there were concerns about him being able to sustain that fastball velocity in his outings, and it kind of led to some mixed results at Louisville. But last year, I think, was a positive step forward in his development, even though he did go through some rough patches with his command. But this year, it feels like he's found another gear. And at the very least, it feels like there's a high floor left-hander that can generate a lot of swings and misses. Maybe he develops into a back-end starter. Maybe he develops into a bullpen arm. But regardless, I feel like the Orioles have something there with Gongora. And then go all the way down to the 19th round. Braylon Whitaker was chosen out of Cox Mill High School in Concord, North Carolina that year. Appeared in just 8 games in 2025. Missed a lot of time with injury. Goes up to Delmarva this year and has just been solid across the board, getting good contact at the plate, walking a lot. The defense has looked really good at all 3 outfield positions. He's got some speed, pretty solid arm. I don't know, if Whitaker is going to be a guy that is firmly inside of our top 50 or not at year's end, but there's at least an interesting profile there, and we're talking about someone who just turned 20, so younger guy still.
Yeah, man, Whitaker's fun. We talked about on the last episode, guys we just like watch him play. He's kind of up there for me because he's fun on defense. He doesn't strike out. He walks, very selective. He's not hitting for much power, but again, really young. I think that's something you can work on over time. I've had a lot of fun with Whitaker, and I would throw Andrew Tess in there. I don't care what Eric Longenhagen said, former guest of the show, and still a fan of his work, but just leaving Andrew Tess out there, out of his 63-person list last week was no bueno. I think Andrew Tess has a lot of upside as well. And yeah, Gongora, man, he's been incredibly impressive. He's surprisingly gets the nod to Double-A and hasn't missed a beat. In fact, he's only gotten better, in my opinion. I'm also kind of intrigued by who is it? Oh yeah, Michael Caldone, I think is still kind of interesting to me. He's only getting like short relief stints, and he's kind of bouncing from level to level where needed because the Orioles are very shorthanded on pitching. So I wonder if whether it's next year or in the second half of this year, if he could get a more consistent role and try to carve something out there. Yeah, and it's a shame as Isaiah Salinas can't get healthy. Hopefully that move to the 60-day was a paper move, but I'm not going to keep my hopes too high on that.
Yeah, I'll just say with Gongora, the big thing that's like, whoa, like there really could be something here. This could be a guy. What if he's like a Bruce Zimmerman type? I mean, Bruce Zimmerman is still kicking around, AAA, Quad A guy. Like he's had a pretty long career in pro ball. It keeps going from team to team. What if Sebastian Gongora, if that's his ceiling, like I think that's pretty good for when he was drafted and given his history. But to have he had a 12% walk rate last year. It's 4.5%, and he's in Double-A now. So like once these guys get to, I get it's fun to like dream on, and you can be like, yeah, it's only high A, it's only low A. I get that, but I feel like once you get to Double-A and you're doing stuff like that, that's telling. And Gongora is also like, if you watch a lot of his outings, it's not a ton of hard. He has some nights where it's like, oh, he gave up 7 hits. Maybe 2 of them are hard hits. I don't have the exact data, but he's got some nights where the final stat line, just the bullpen comes in and lets everybody score. That he exits the game with 2 guys on base or so, and they both end up scoring. That inflates his ERA. Gungor's had a really solid year, and I'll just say, I know we just talked about Evan Yates in the last episode, and I said maybe his ceiling is like Houston Roth, but shout out to him real quick. He's been in Double A all year, and so his first 3 outings, he allowed 10 runs with 12 walks and just 6 strikeouts in 11 innings. Over his last 4 starts, he's got a 3.86 ERA, 16 strikeouts, just 5 walks, and he's gone 5+ innings in each of those outings. So maybe finding some footing and being a nice little depth piece down there in Double A. So yeah, again, good solid depth. Maybe there's not a superstar, but depth salvaging this class.
Yeah, and I know that his health situation is really going to be our utmost concern, but just so we don't completely ignore what Nate George has done to this point in his career, because it is a big part of this 2024 draft class. The season he had last year was really impressive, going from the FCL all the way up to Aberdeen by year's end. And I had made the point a few weeks ago that I was really pleased with how he was performing over the first few weeks at Frederick, especially because he got off to a little bit of a slow start, and it might have represented the first true slump or anything approaching a slump in his professional career, and he came right out of it.
It's a good point. Yeah, I think he's before this mystery illness. Yeah, hopefully if he can recover, come back and pick up where he left off, or at least eventually get to where he left off, I think he's in a really, really good spot to be one of the top prospects in the system and one of the guys that can become a potential impact guy that in a year or two where we're like, okay, let's go. Nate George could be on maybe not the tier of a Samuel Basallo or a Gunnar Henderson, but in the top 20 prospect in baseball. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility eventually.
And with that, now we will head into our final segment of the night. Last call brought to you by Checker Spot Brewing, located 1421 Ridgely Street. Checker Spot is not far from Camden Yards, making it the perfect place for a pre or post game drink. And if you don't have tickets to the game this year, or the Orioles are out of town, head over to Checker Spot and watch the game. They've got plenty of TVs that go along with good food and drink. Plus, they are open 7 days a week, so be sure to check them out. Checker Spot Brewing, located at 1421 Ridgely Street in South Baltimore. And now we're going to pivot to some recent promotion news in the Orioles farm system. Earlier this week, left-handed pitcher Joseph Giroux got his well-deserved promotion from High A Frederick up to Double A Chesapeake after dominating at High A. And that raises the question, who's the next pitching prospect that should get a bump up to the next level? And by promotion, I don't mean spot appearance from one level to the next and then back down. I'm talking a permanent promotion, which should be the case with Giroux.
I'll roll the tape back from last week. Like Caden Hunter, move him up to High A. I think that's a natural replacement. A guy who should fit in pretty well in High A. I wanted to take a stab at like who would be the next guy to like get up to the big leagues. Like if anybody has a take on, is it Nestor Herman or is it Levi Wells? Maybe that's an episode for next week. We dive into those guys, and so we keep this more in the lower levels. But yeah, I'd say Caden Hunter is I think a name. But again, going back to when we talked about the promotion episode just last week or 2 weeks ago, the issue is the Orioles desperately need arms in the lower levels. So I do wonder, are they going to be slower with some of these guys? Even your Caden Hunters and Christian Rodriguez's, guys who deserve to be promoted, are they going to have them hang back in hopes of maybe by the end of the year being able to be more aggressive, or what's that situation? But yeah, you've got a couple of guys now who are pushing hard to be challenged.
I'm going to go with Eber Cartaya because he's really popping off on a lot of different outlets. It's not like it's just one guy who's like Keith Law shouting him out, Eric Longenhagen shouting him out.
Oh, Keith Law said Kate Anderson sucks, but Eber Cartaya, he puts on a pedestal. I just don't understand. Sorry.
I don't either. But we've seen, and I feel like Baseball America's even said some nice things about Cartaya. Like, real quick, shout out to Yaki Rivera, who Baseball America Robo Scout had a really nice paragraph or a few sentences about him, about how his two-seamer moves as much as anyone's, or something about his sinker moves a lot, his sweeper moves a lot. Interesting arm. But anyway, Eber Cartaya, a lot of people are picking up what he's putting down. Seems like he's moved his arm slot up a little bit. Velocity has maybe ticked up, and it's helped play his curveball better. Whatever is happening, it's working. He's got like a 0.87 ERA. I think he's ready for the challenge at AA. Join Joseph Jirwa. Bring JT Quinn. Bring everybody up to AA. Let's go. Forget about Frederick. We need to move everybody up to Chesapeake.
Yaki Rivera is my pick, and the reason for me is just that I don't think he has anything left to show at AA. He pitched well there last year, but I think that you can make a reasonable argument that you want to see him cut back on the walks, and he's done that this year in Chesapeake. Not only that, but he also had a brief stint at AAA and more than held his own there. So to me, they've really got to look at that because he's 22 years old. He's going to be Rule 5 eligible again this offseason. And if you want to look at the kind of role he can play in the bullpen, I think that this is actually really important to the upper levels of the organization, possibly even the big leagues as we get further into the season. Rivera is one of those guys who can ramp the fastball up a little bit in a short outing, but if you need him to go long, he can go long, and he'll work with his different mix of pitches. He's got, as Bob just mentioned, a really good sweeper, and he can mix those in with a fastball that he can dial back a little bit if he's going to go a longer outing, but that he still throws for strikes, and he's still able to locate. And we saw this over the weekend, 4 shutout innings in a really key relief outing for Chesapeake. He was credited with the win in that one. To me, there's nothing left for him to prove at AA. He's really good upper-level depth to have at a bare minimum. And maybe he's a guy that, as you get further into the season, you start to more seriously have that conversation about where he could fit into the 40-man roster. Do you protect him? Does he get big league innings before the year ends? Because I think he's pitching well enough and starting to get enough notice that burying him in AA for the season just isn't going to work if you're concerned about losing him in the Rule 5. So I'm really hoping that sooner rather than later we see Rivera get up to AAA permanently, and it's not just a go up for a week because they need some fresh arms and come back down situation.
Completely agree. And I didn't mean to steal your thunder by throwing his name out in the middle of mine.
All good. I still got my point across. And with that, that does it for this week's episode. We will be back next week. In the meantime, you can check out our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitch. You can also find us on Blue Sky. While you're browsing around the internet, you can be sure to check out 2 different places, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. We've got a lot of great content over there. And then our Patreon community, where you can sign up to the $3, $5, or $10 levels and have access to bonus weekly shows from Bob, Nick, and myself, monthly updates to our top 50 prospects list, and patron-exclusive communities within our Discord channel. So be sure to check that out at patreon.com. For Bob Phil and Nick Stevens and Zach Spedden, you're listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.